Hey, Dr. Franz here with another Common Sense Minute, and today I have Adrian from Newrologix, and we're going to talk to you together about what Newrologix does. So I'm going to start by asking the question you already have. What is it?
So Newrologix is a brain-based program that involves doing brain mapping initially to get a picture of the brain and to see what parts of the brain are not doing their job correctly. And we use a technology that's commonly used in hospitals called EEG, which is an electroencephalogram, and it just listens to the tiny little impulses of the brain electrically, and then we take all that information, run it through a database system, and it gives us a full detailed picture of the brain, its profile, and all the different regions that are processing information on a day-to-day basis. And then that's part one. Part two of Newrologix is we do neurofeedback, which is another part of the brain-based therapy using EEG, where we give the brain feedback on the different patterns that it's producing, and we reward the brain for producing the right patterns, and we essentially create a negative or kind of like a punishment. And the punishment is not, we're not shocking anybody, it's basically just a bright and a dark screen. So when the brain's producing the right patterns, the screen is bright. When it's producing the wrong patterns, the screen gets dark. And the brain learns how to control the brightness on the screen over time, and we start to adjust and balance out the brain waves, and we get really amazing results from doing the sessions over time.
That is so cool. Now, I've known that neurofeedback, it's been around for me at least for 15 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a question. You say an EEG, but I've heard it called a QEEG.
Great question. Good point. So a QEEG, which is what we do, is a quantitative EEG. The difference in EEG versus QEEG is that we're both using the same electrical signals, but in an EEG we're looking at the waves and what they look like. So neurologists will look at those and see if there's anything like epilepsy or head traumas or different type of seizure activity. In a quantitative EEG, we take all their information and we digitize it and turn it into numbers. So it's basically a bunch of statistics.
Okay.
So the numbers then gives us information about the amount of the frequency, what frequency the brain is producing, the power and strength of the frequencies, and then we look at things like coherence, which is how balanced the left and right sides are. There's a number to that. We look at symmetry or asymmetry to see how balanced they are from left to right sides. And so we typically will get about 100,000 samples of brain activity during a brain mapping.
How long is a brain mapping?
Anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how much data we need to collect. So we'll take a little bit more data sometimes just because of movement and fidgeting, because movement tends to cause what's called artifact,
Mm-hmm.
and artifact is basically just noise that we don't need in the data. So anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes per recording, and we do an eyes open and an eyes closed recording. So much easier than a 24-hour EEG that you would get in a hospital.
See, the brain continues to amaze me. So what I just heard was, in 3 to 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
you can get over 100,000 bits of information
Mm-hmm.
that tell you how a brain is working.
Yeah, so think of it as like when you go to a lab and get a blood draw. We're taking just one sample of the blood as it's in that state, and we can get a big picture of the profile of the metabolism of the blood and the brain and the body, and all those things are easily accessible through just a collection of data. So it's really, really simple.
I've seen brain mapping in the past from other people, and the ones I've seen, I saw it a couple ways. One was different colors, so it shows you what areas of the brain are working more predominantly than others. And another one was more of a graph, because what I remember was this one section, and when they were showing, they go, see this section all lit up? I go, yes. They go, there's a high probability of ADHD there.
Right.
And I went, oh my God, what else can you tell?
Yeah.
And a lot of things.
Yeah, so we actually, when we do the mapping, we take a cap that has 19 sensors built into it that are spread out over all the different brain regions. So we have the frontal areas, which are executive control, decision making, focus, attention, memory as well. And those are the frontal areas. And we have the temporal areas, which on the left side you've got language and speech processing. On the right side you have auditory processing.
Okay.
In the back of the brain you have visual processing. So we're mapping 19 different areas that all have to do with everything from the things I mentioned, including memory, so episodic memory, procedural memory, sequential memory, digit span memory, short-term memory, working memory, all the things that we require on a day-to-day basis to function. So looking at each of the sensors, all 19 sensors have about 256 different variables that we analyze. So it's a lot of information. We've been collecting brain data for over 60 years now. So we've got really big, robust databases. That
6 is 0.
6-0, yeah.
Yeah, and where is that database? I heard there's one at NIH.
There's a few. There's a few clinical databases and there's a few research databases. The one we use was developed actually by my mentor, who's one of the pioneers in the field. His name is Dr. Richard Suter. He's very easily accessible, easy to find in research, has written books on the subject. And his ideology and his thought process was that the research databases are very restricted to just a normal population of people. A clinical database looks at everybody and it gives us a better sample representation of what's out there, and we can compare individuals to essentially an entire population of people with certain conditions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go just totally off the path here. In all the ones that you've done, I'm gonna kind of focus on something really off the track. Like, some people have more like psychic abilities, telepathic abilities. I mean, have you come across people like that and looked at and see that their brain works differently?
Yeah, so actually everybody has the ability to be more sensitive to everything from the environment to other people and feelings, and all that's dictated by the brain. The brain can focus in on low frequencies, which are the frequencies that are involved in daydreaming, but as well as imagery, creativity and art. So there's frequencies that are very conducive for that. People that have that have higher amounts of the theta frequency.
Okay.
And then you have people that are very by the book and very rigid, who produce a very significant amount of a beta frequency that makes them very rigid. And so you can be very calm and relaxed, or you can be very high strung, and all that's dictated by the brainwave patterns.
But you can change that.
You can change.
Not you can change it, you can help the person change it.
Right, right. And so what we do is, one of the things that a lot of people ask is, when we do the neurofeedback, are you going to change my personality? And the answer is no. We're going to make the brain a lot more efficient.
Wait, what if I want you to?
To change your personality?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, things like anger and irritability,
Yeah.
and things like that, we can help the brain become a lot more sensitive to those things. So one of the things that happens in neurofeedback is that you actually make so if you're a very anxious person, you have a high threshold for anxiety, and you kind of topple over when you reach like level 10. In neurofeedback, what we do is we make the brain and the body a little bit more sensitive to that and aware that you're getting anxious, so you kind of cut it off, before it gets to that point where you've already reached a level 10. So being very aware is one of the first things that people notice. Sleep improvements happen relatively quickly. But the biggest thing that people notice, and I'll tell you a funny story real quick. I had a parent that had a child that was really suffering in school, having a very difficult time, and the brainwave patterns were getting better over time. And she comes in one day and says, Johnny, little Johnny's still not doing his homework. And I said, well, neurofeedback can't make him do his homework, but it can help him when he does his homework to do it a lot more efficiently and better. And so we can't change the human elements and the human factors that come into having a brain, but we can sure make it a lot more efficient.
So, did he start doing his homework?
He did, yeah. We implemented a reward system, so we teamed them up with a cognitive behavioral person and worked out some things and did some behavior analysis, and so always good to look at neurofeedback, with other things, and so we have people that have done neurofeedback with acupuncture, they've done it with homeopathy, they've done it with nutritional therapy, and it always seems to work really well in combination with anything. So if you're doing anything like language and speech therapy, all those different things, it just complements what you're already doing.
Or augments it.
Augments it, exactly, yeah.
So neurofeedback can be used in a huge spectrum of things, like autism, ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, sports improvement.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So head injuries as well too, so bumps on the head. A lot of times it doesn't take much. If you've ever kind of done the research and looked at how the brain sits inside of this skull, because the skull isn't smooth and perfect around everything. There's bones and things that hold it in place, and so even things that involve shifting, or what are called midline shifts, can cause lesions with little cuts on the brain. And so when we do the brain map, there's very heavy supported literature that shows that different elevations in certain frequencies, like delta or theta, on the low end of the frequency spectrum, are pretty indicative of things like head injuries and damage. So we can identify and look at those areas if it's focal, or if it's in one specific area, we can actually see it, compare it to an MRI or a CT scan, and we can see that it's actually there and the brain's responding to that injury. So, and then we can reverse that over time.
So again, way over here, you could, in theory, pick up a brain tumor when it was very small.
If the brain is impeding and causing, what we call any type of, like a subdural mass or
Right.
hematoma, any type of pressure like that will disrupt the brain because it's being basically pushed on and it can create a bruise or anything like that. And then there's really high resolution quantitative EEGs that can look at the brain in three-dimensional models, which we are capable of doing that. That can actually look at substrates of the brain, so different regions, different areas, different parts individually, and see how they're working and operating. So a lot of, I've spoken over the years with a lot of neurosurgeons, and they love this. Neurologists, they haven't quite grasped it just yet, but the neurosurgeons, they love it. They really do, because it helps pinpoint different areas.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So it's, I forgot what I was gonna ask, so I'll go a different way. You know, one of the new things in the last 15 years for me is they keep talking about how plastic the brain is.
Mhm.
I've never really liked that word, but I understand it.
Right.
The point is, guys, is that the brain can heal itself.
Right.
Lots of times in medicine, before I ever knew neurofeedback, because, you know, I'm an oldie but goodie, the brain can't fix itself.
Right.
All right, so like you have had a massive head trauma or a stroke. Let's take a stroke, okay? And so now you're damaged and the brain can't recover.
Right.
But that's just not true.
It's not. We had a patient that came to us, and if you look at the research, this was 7 years post-stroke.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the literature says that if you don't get it back within 6 to 8, 9 months, it's gone forever. So this person came to us after a 7-year, lull from the time he had the stroke to when I met him. And he had total right side paralysis and peripheral vision loss. And in the time that we work with him, he is now fully walking, actually got his driver's license back.
Wow.
And his right arm, he can raise it about this high and go across his chest. And now we're teaching and learning how to reuse our fingers. And so, you know, we know that the brain does have this plasticity, that it has the ability to bypass and reroute information. The research out there on it is amazing, because you can remove a whole hemisphere of the brain and not lose the ability to speech, even though the speech area is over here. The brain will reassign and reorganize itself.
Right. Now we know that happens, well, pediatricians know that happens in kids.
Right.
Okay, because kids have a amazing ability to, and I had that happen. I didn't even have neurofeedback then. I had a child who had meningitis and basically infarcted half the brain.
Yeah.
And I was very concerned this child was not going to do anything. Totally normal.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, and I got to see this child 20 years later working, and I'm like, I remember you. And she goes, I remember you.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I've seen, the things I've seen in 20 years of doing this is just, it's amazing and phenomenal. So, you know, to bring it here, it really is amazing, because we're going to have the ability to really create a lot of changes, and I'm really excited about it.
I am really excited because like I said, I've known about it for, well, 20 years actually, yeah. And so I've seen it with patients. I did it with my kids. I was telling you the other day that one of my kids was pretty funny and said, "It didn't work, Mom." And yet 15 years later, had a migraine, went in the room, played a video game for an hour, came back with no migraine.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Dude, that just doesn't work."
Yeah.
And I said, "So clearly your neurofeedback worked all
Right.
those years ago."
Right.
I said, "Because I get migraines and I can't go play a video game."
Right. No, I've had 2 migraines my entire life. I don't wish it on anybody, but you couldn't get me to have a conversation with you unless it was in a dark room.
Right.
And very low, soft tones, because there's
Right.
nothing worse than a migraine. So we've done quite a bit with everything from like you mentioned before. So autism spectrum, high functioning autism, really good success rate. I've actually worked with a couple of kids that were nonverbal, and one particular case was amazing because after some time, the mom shared a story with us that her daughter came to her and asked her for a glass of milk, and she had never spoken a word before. And so the mom very emotionally said that you helped introduce us to our 8-year-old daughter who's never really spoken, never been able to express herself, because the fog that's there is just it's tremendous. And we do talk a lot about brain fog and neurofeedback, and lifting that fog and helping kids that are having trouble focusing in the classroom, people suffering from anxiety who can't keep it together, depression.
That's huge,
Yeah.
because today on the medical side, it's huge. There's so much anxiety, and there's so much more anxiety in kids today than there ever was before.
Right.
So just having another tool that's safe, that's non-toxic, that's not invasive, that's not pharmaceutical, that has over 20 years, well 60 really, but 20 years of research and clinical work that shows it works is amazing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people complain about the price, but I go, even this is so much more affordable, guys, and in the long run, this is a pittance in the lifetime of your child when it gives them tools to correct all these dysfunctions.
The CDC reported, this is something they reported, that if you medicate a child from the age of 4 to the time that they graduate high school with all of the direct and indirect costs, you're going to spend over $36,000 in medication and doctor visits and time and gas and money. So this is a fraction of that, obviously, and the difference is that we're not creating any issues with liver, cardiac enzyme, growth trajectory, appetite, mood changes, none of that, because the most you're ever going to get, I guess you could call a side effect from neurofeedback is, some people experience a little bit of dizziness in the initial stages, or maybe a headache, but that typically is not, they're just focusing, concentrating too hard and they strain or they get a tension headache. But that's it. I've never in my 20 years, and the previous 20 years of research, there's very little side effects ever documented from neurofeedback. If anything, some people notice, within the first couple sessions, a significant change. So it can happen very quickly. Some people take a little bit longer, but the brain's electrochemical. So if we're doing pharmaceuticals, treating the chemical aspects of the brain, the other half, which is the non-chemical side, which is the electrical side, that's where we work. And so we can influence the chemicals by altering,
Well, yeah, it makes sense.
It makes sense, right?
Electrochemical.
Right.
Now, we're going to be together on August 8th at 5 o'clock here at the Franz Center, and we really want people to come and be able to ask questions and hear what you have to say from their point of view.
Sure.
We can sit here and talk all day, but you're not going to watch it all day because, hey, it's not a good movie. But, but I just, yeah, Adrian, how long have we known each other? Several years, and I was so impressed when you first came to talk to us. Because it just taps into stuff I've known, and for me and the practice, it continues to just open up other avenues in what we do, and I'm so glad to hear you say, because I didn't have to, that it works perfectly with homeopathy, with Chinese medicine, with nutrition, and that just makes sense, because the more I do deal with Chinese medicine too, it's about energy.
It is.
So what you're doing is correcting dysfunctional energy in the brain.
That's exactly right. Yeah, everything is frequencies.
Yeah.
Lights are frequency, waves are frequencies, and our lives are dictated by frequencies, and whether we want to believe it or not. And so even cells resonate, vibrate at different frequencies, and so all the different frequencies that we've mapped out, and people ask why the brain waves can be altered, and if you think about it, every different state or mood that you have is dictated by one of those things, and so by knowing what those are, we can reinforce or discourage the brain from producing certain patterns. And this has all been tested up against neuropsych test batteries that have been around since Freud. So I mean, back since when? So it's very robust. Tons of literature on it. We'll have a bibliography that you can post on your site that has over 40 years of research in neurofeedback, and it's updated regularly by the Utah University or School of Medicine. One of the directors out there is really big in the neurofeedback. UCLA, University of Tennessee, Harvard, Yale, they've all done neurofeedback studies. So it's finally out of the shadows and into mainstream, but we're gonna...
And affordable.
And affordable now.
Okay, I mean, there's no reason not to look into this for anybody.
Right.
And we're partnering together, the Franz Center and Newrologix, because I know it works, because as he says, he's got 40 years, so all of you who need the evidence-based stuff, it's there. I've seen it clinically work, and because we continue here to strive to empower people through education, and now, actual experience and recovery and healing, it's nothing more than a win-win situation.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about August 8th and coming and talking to everybody and answering any questions that I can and giving you what I've learned over 20 years, and I think that everyone will be pretty impressed and pretty happy with what's out there. And like I said, this isn't when I first started it was considered foo-foo science, but now I have I've got tons of literature and research to support it, so it's
So
evidence-based.
sad, it's not foo-foo anymore.
I know. Well, someone gave it a blessing, and now it's not foo-foo, but that's how the world works, right?
But even if someone didn't give it a blessing, I go, look, how many patients have you seen? I go, they're the ones that tell you.
Yeah.
And remember, guys, Dr. Franz doesn't offer or partner or do things that don't work. All right? So we look forward to seeing you August 8th, and thanks for watching.